What We Testers Know by Accident, an introduction to the Gettier Problem by Thomas Vaniotis.
So testers, software testers, are in the knowledge business. We seek to reduce uncertainty about a product through various methods and acquire more knowledge than we had before. The topic is knowledge, and specifically what philosophers talk about when they refer to epistemology, the science of knowledge. It's a question of how do we distinguish knowledge from mere beliefs? Is it possible to really know anything? And what happens when the things that I claim to know conflict with things that someone else claims to know? These are the main questions in epistemology. Now, I suspect that most of the people at this conference accept the premise that the scientific method is a fairly reliable way to get information about the natural world. But if you accept that, you have to hold a whole bunch of prior beliefs, including that there is such a thing as knowledge, that hypothesis testing is a reasonable way to get to knowledge, that logical inferences and mathematical proofs are valid, that the human mind is capable of reasoning in a reliable way. These are not, strictly speaking, scientific questions or questions of natural science. They're questions of philosophy, because there's no reason to believe the findings of science unless you have a coherent philosophy that undergirds it. So understanding philosophy can help us in a number of ways. First of all, it can help us to clarify our own beliefs. It can help us to be more confident in the beliefs that we hold, or in some cases, it can cause us to re-examine our beliefs and change them when we have a dialogue with those who disagree with us. So as an example of the application of epistemology to software testing, I'm going to show you a single famous argument in the history of philosophy, one that's both narrow enough to fit in the few moments that I have here, and also truly core to the present debate in epistemology. And that question is very basic. What is knowledge? So I'm going to begin by presenting a traditional account of knowledge. It's one that in the great majority of cases is useful. And then I'm going to present a version of the argument of what knowledge is that directly applies to what we do as software testers on a daily basis. And I hope that at the end of this talk, you're going to be a little more energized about learning about epistemology, and that you'll have some ideas about how you can represent your beliefs in a precise, philosophically sound manner. But before we get into this specific question of what is the definition of knowledge, I want to lay down the context, a couple of parameters. So I'm going to do some definitions. I'm going to define a few terms that are generally accepted among academic philosophers and generally match the way most people think what these words mean. But the argument that I'm presenting is applicable even if we have a disagreement about the specifics of these definitions. So I don't want you to get hung up on these little definitions that I give. This is just to set the context. All right, first, a sentence. A sentence is a sentence in some language, either a human language or a computer language. It's a series of words or symbols. So some examples: Socrates is a man. That's an English sentence. 2 + 2 = 4, mathematical sentence. P = NP, a famous sentence in computer science. It is not raining. An argument can be a sentence. If Socrates is a man and all men are mortal, then Socrates is mortal. From sentence, we go to proposition. A proposition is the fully qualified idea that is represented by a sentence. So in the case of most sentences that humans say, it's actually rather difficult to get it to a proposition. So if we use my example of it is raining, there's a whole bunch of other things in the proposition that aren't there in the sentence. For example, it is not raining in San Jose. How many raindrops count as raining? How far are the raindrops away from me for it to be raining where I am? Does artificial rain count? And so on and so forth. In the case of logical and mathematical sentences, it's a little simpler, but basically there's some kind of mapping between words, a sentence, and a proposition, which is the fully qualified idea that that sentence represents. There's a whole discipline of philosophy dedicated to answering that question, but for the purposes of today's debate, we're simply going to assert that there's a good way to map sentences to propositions, and then we use them mostly interchangeably. And in the rest of this talk, I will often use the letter P to refer to a proposition. All right, from propositions we get to belief. Belief is what happens if you think about a proposition and then you assent to it. So we have three options when we're presented with a proposition. We can believe P, we can reject P, or we can withhold judgment. We can just say, I don't know, I have no opinion, I have no belief. But the main matter here is that belief is distinguished from reasoning and truth. You can have unreasonable beliefs, plenty of us do, and you can have false beliefs. Plenty of us have those too. Truth. Okay. So when I use the word truth, what I mean here is the plain English definition of truth. So P, a proposition is true if and only if it corresponds to the real world. If we're being a little more precise, we might say that P is true if and only if P. Or maybe if we use set theory to describe it, we say there's a set of propositions that are the real world, and P is a member of that set of propositions. So maybe you're offended by this slide. You say, no, there is no truth, or truth is always relative to some perceiver. I'm interested in both of those arguments, but for today, we're just going to say that there's some way of getting at truth. And it actually doesn't matter whether there is or not. Skeptics are usually saying we can't know what propositions are true. And relativists are saying that either there are no true propositions or every fully qualified proposition includes a statement of who the believer is. But in both of those cases, they're just limiting the universe of things that we can know are true. Justification. Basically, when I say justification, I mean that a person has a good reason to believe the proposition. In an introductory course on epistemology, you're going to spend weeks on different theories of justification. But I want you to use whatever your favorite method of justification is. So here are some examples of intuitive theories of justification. So logical justification, the argument I gave, all men are mortal, Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. That's justified by the rules of logic. You can introspect. You can say if I have two things and another two things, I count them up, I have four. That's a form of mathematical justification. You can justify things through proof. You can justify things, mathematical proof, through scientific experiment, from memories. So I remember that I went to the store yesterday. That's the reason, my justification for that being true. From trusted authority, okay? I, for example, believe that the Higgs boson exists not because I'm a physicist and I ran a high-energy collision chamber, but because the scientists at CERN are trusted authorities about particles, okay? You can also believe something on the basis of it being coherent with other beliefs. Excuse me, some people will say that religious revelation is a means of justification. It doesn't matter what theory of justification you have, the argument works anyway. So now we have a common set of vocabulary. Let's get into the main argument. And just to show you how big this argument is, basically goes back to Plato, the first one who was able to think philosophically about what it means to know. And using slightly different words, Plato came up with this definition of knowledge. So S, a subject, a person, believes, P, a proposition, or sorry, knows a proposition, if and only if these three conditions. The subject believes it, the proposition happens to be true, and the subject is justified in believing that P. So this operator here, if and only if, means that if you don't have one of these three, you don't know it, and if there's something that appears to be knowledge that doesn't have those things, this definition is not true. So I'm going to try to convince you that Plato was pretty much on the right track, and I'm going to do that through a few examples. All right, so here's an example. The subject is me, and the proposition is that I am in San Jose giving a talk about epistemology at CAST, and I will make the statement that I know that. So, does it fit the definition? First, do I believe it? So I think about the proposition for a second. Yes, I believe it. I believe I'm giving a talk. Okay. Is it true? Yes. Okay? Now, you might have less justification for that than I do, but I think that we can all pretty much agree that this is a true proposition. Finally, Am I justified in believing it? So fill in your account of justification for the account that I'm going to give. So here's my justification for this. All right, so Thomas Vaniotis, my memory tells me that's my name. I could look at my driver's license. That has my name on it. The last airport I arrived at was called San Jose. I haven't driven far enough to be someplace else. I have notes in front of me about epistemology. I'm talking. Matt Heuser is in the background. I know that he's the organizer of the emerging topics for CAST. It's consistent with all my other beliefs. As far as I know, I'm not on drugs. I'm not hallucinating. I have no history of those things. So it seems very likely that I know this. All right. Second example. Same subject. The San Francisco Giants won their most recent game. Let's go through it. I don't actually have any belief about that whatsoever. I don't follow whatever sports the San Francisco Giants play. Okay, I haven't seen a newspaper today. I don't have a belief. So I can't say, even if it happens to be true, that I know it. So I don't know that. All right, here's another example. So I am a physicist at the Royal Academy of Sciences in 1850. Okay, and I have this proposition that says Newton's 3 laws apply at all scales of the universe. So, do I believe it? Yes, I believe it. I'm an educated scientist. I believe it. Now, we know that that happens to not be true because of quantum physics and because of the other scale, relativity, right? So it's not true, but I would argue that this physicist is actually justified in believing it. There are lots of reasons, right? They have lots of experiments that show this to be true. They have experience with the practical events. It went through rigorous peer review, this theory, and it's lasted for many years. So while they were justified and they believed it, it wasn't true. We would say intuitively that they didn't know that. So final example. Okay, a 5-year-old child who watches a lot of TV, doesn't know much about history, but has a belief that says there were people alive in the Stone Age on the basis of the Flintstones, okay? So we would say that while they believe that, and that happens to be true, they don't know it. The 5-year-old doesn't know it because they don't have a justification for their belief. Okay. So this is it. We call this the JTB theory, the justified true belief theory, and it basically lasted from Plato to the year 1963. I'm simplifying a little bit. Now, according to the legend of analytic philosophers, this professor Edmund Gettier was working in obscurity and was under a lot of pressure to publish something and to stay on that publish-or-perish tenure track, and he quickly wrote up this little paper asking, is justified true belief knowledge? And he shocked everybody by saying no. His paper was a sensation, and basically he never had to worry about publishing anything ever again. His proof for this is by means of counterexamples. So he came up with examples of things that we intuitively would say are not knowledge, but that meet all 3 of the criteria. And I'm going to show you that argument now. So here's how it goes. Here's some evidence. Okay, so James and I have both applied for a certain job. That's evidence number 1. Evidence number 2. I saw the president of the company who's a friend of mine, and he's assured me James is getting the job. Now, James, being James, has some crazy testing things that he's doing, and he pulls out these 10 coins out of his pocket and makes me test them. Okay, so James has 10 coins in his pocket. So on the basis of these 3 pieces of evidence, I form a strongly justified belief that says the person who is going to get the job has 10 coins in his pocket. So this is justified belief. And it turns out it's true. The man who will get the job does have 10 coins in his pocket. So Plato and all of them would say that I know that the person has the 10 coins because I believe it, it's true, and I'm justified in believing it. But Gettier came up with a twist ending, okay? It's true, but I have 10 coins in my pocket, and I'm the one who's going to get the job. So it seems like I have justified true belief, but we would intuitively say I didn't, in fact, know that. All right, here's the second argument that Gettier gives. It's a slightly different form of the same argument. John owns a Ford. Okay. I've known John for years. He's a huge Ford fan. His father worked for Ford. He owns stock in Ford. He put one of those Calvin peeing on the Chevy logo bumper stickers on his car. This morning I saw John driving a Ford into the conference, so I'm totally justified in believing point number one. Point number two is merely a logical consequence of one. As a matter of fact, it doesn't matter, this crazy belief I have about Michael being in Massachusetts doesn't matter at all. I could put anything in the second part of that and still be justified in believing it, because an or statement, as long as the first part is true, the whole sentence is true. This is what we call disjunctive addition, or the logicians do. Now it happens that statement 2 is true. Either John owns a Ford or Michael is in Massachusetts. But there's a twist ending. It's true only because Michael is in Massachusetts. It happens that John had an unfortunate accident with his Ford, and the one that I saw him driving this morning was a rental car. So it's another case where I have a true belief that is justified, but I would say it's far-fetched to say that I, in fact, knew proposition 2. So I'm now going to try to apply this to software testing. Here's some evidence. Module M caused a major bug on Tuesday when executing feature F. So I'm justified in believing this. Some of our beta testers called on Tuesday to complain about feature F. I talked to the architect, and he was like, oh yeah, module M's full of problems. I tested it without module M. The developer for the feature saw the unit test go red when he installed module M. So, seems justified. Therefore, I'm going to make a logical conclusion. Therefore, some module, so I've gone from something specific to something general, which is a perfectly valid leap of logic. Some module caused a major bug when executing feature F. This is indisputably true based on, or indisputably justified based on my evidence in example 1. And it happens that this is true. Some module caused a major bug. But at this point, you can probably guess what the next slide says. There's a twist ending. The twist ending in this case is that there was this crazy load condition that happened on Tuesday, and module J caused the bug. It was not module M. So I was justified in believing that 2, I believe 2 was true, but it's hard to say that that was in fact knowledge. So I want you to think about the times when you have failed in testing to find some critical information. And I think you would say that a lot of the times it smells like these examples. When you were justified in believing something that happened to be true, but it didn't really get to the nut of why it was true, it was probably that you hit a Gettier case or a Gettier-like case. So this is only the very beginning of the story. Since this paper, philosophers have been attempting to patch Plato's knowledge definition, or throw it out entirely and replace it with something new, or find a way to disprove Gettier's cases. So there's a lot of fascinating reading to be done here, but this is only a 20-minute talk, and I may well have gone over it already. I beg your indulgence, and I just will leave you with 2 points. First of all, the tools of philosophy are very powerful at revealing unexpected quirks in our beliefs, and it also gives us a very precise language that allows us to cut the knot between this insistence that our stakeholders have that we must provide them with knowledge, when really all we have is belief and justification. And second, I'm very heartened to see so much discussion of design of experiments and history of science and philosophy of science in the AST community. I think it's crucial that we talk about the real core discussions in philosophy, including epistemology. We talked a little bit blah, blah, blah. Scott talked a little bit about metaphysics this morning. There's ethics. There's a lot more to philosophy than sitting around a college dorm with a few beers and wondering, dude, are we all living in the Matrix? Or arguing about atheism in comment boxes on the internet, or vague conversations about truth, beauty, and the sublime. Philosophy is a serious, rigorous pursuit of answers to important questions about the field of human experience, and it has direct applications to our field. So I welcome you to join me after this talk. Continue the conversation at my blog, Twitter. I'll be around, and I really look forward to talking to some of you about this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Thomas. So we have just a minute or two before we need to start the next talk. Do we